what's up, fellow YouTubers? So this morning I'm going to be showing you how to create a simple Node.js processor engine which processes Rabbit messages from queues. Not only does it process them, but it creates the queues. Now, on the other hand, if you're not familiar with RabbitMQ, there's exchanges, and those exchanges have to exist. But the queues will be created by the engine. All you have to do is give it the names and give it the configuration. But this engine, if you use the engine, you can just create the processes that will do all the work, and it'll be simple to run. It'll be easy to create the logic. Of course, depending on how complicated your logic is for your processors, well, that's going to vary, right? But as far as using the engine, it'll be easy, and you don't have to worry about all the connection, how to do it. And I also leverage ChatGPT to do it, and I'm going to show you that, and I'm going to share the link of the conversation that I have with ChatGPT to help me create this. Now, you might think, oh, you're cheating now. You're using ChatGPT. Well, let's face it, the reality is that we have to use whatever is available to us. And if we're not using ChatGPT now, we're going to get left behind. I was able to create this relatively fast rather than doing it on my own. And ChatGPT provided a lot of the answers. I did get hung up on a couple of things because let's face it, ChatGPT is not perfect. So with that said, you still have to know what you're doing, but it makes it a lot faster because now you're leveraging something else to do the tedious plumbing and things that go on. So let's get started. First thing I want to do is I want to show you how this all works. Let's start with the working concept and work our way backwards into the details. So first thing we have here, and I don't have my terminal running, so let's get that started. So let's increase this a little bit so you can see it better if you're using a mobile device. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to navigate to the repository, and let's see what I have in there. And I have the source, so let's navigate to the source. And now let's see what I have in there. And now you can see I have my package JSON and everything. So let's go ahead and run this processing engine. So I can just simply run npm start. And this should start it right up. And now you'll see some errors. And you say, okay, why do we have errors? Okay, well, if you notice, these errors, they're intentional. Okay. So now this thing is saying, okay, waiting for messages on queue, such and such queue, my company domain, whatever you name, whatever your naming rules are for naming your queues, that's on you. I just named them very generic on my company domain queue. And it tells you here that, hey, this queue already exists. That's fine because it's going to create it if it doesn't exist. And for example, it will, in this case, it's saying, okay, it bounded to the exchange company my company that domain with, and then it says waiting for messages on that user change queue, right? And then it tells you the same thing about the other queue. Then you see some errors here, and you see error processing queue do work for my company. Well, I intentionally created a processor that doesn't have the work, the do work interface, and we're going to get into the details of that. And I wanted to see what it does. So in this case, what it does is it skips the issue that it's not able to process that, but it logs the error, will send it to the console, and it it lets you know that something's wrong. Hopefully you can catch that and see that it's wrong, and you go and fix it. And we'll get into that. And why I did that is so that I know that my engine will still run even if one processor breaks the rules. It'll handle all the other processors, because as you can see, I have various processors. I have this invalid processor that has do work. It says it doesn't exist in the engine, but this one still runs. That's not the problem. The problem is this one, because you notice this one has a run method, whereas the other ones have do work. They're supposed to have do work. Okay, we'll get into all the details of that. Don't worry too much about that. Just know that the reason I'm getting that error is because it has something called run, and it's expecting to do work because the actual processor engine requires a do work method on that class, which is here. So when the processor does the work, it has to do the work there. So let's see it work. Now we know that we have it running here, and so let's go over to Rabbit. Let's go over to Rabbit MQ, and let me bring this down just a little bit so you can see it, because I know I'm having a hard time seeing it. And let's bring this down just a little bit. Okay, so now here is Rabbit. Of course, I installed Rabbit with the defaults. So, and you notice it's running on local 1562, 15672. So I just log in, and you can see my exchanges. Doesn't, okay, whatever. So you can see my exchanges here, company domain and all that. You can see my queues here that are there. Now some of these, I think I created all of these with this application, and I'll run it again so you can see that it'll create these queues based on the program running. So it won't create the exchanges; they should already exist. Because remember, when you're publishing the messages, somebody is already publishing to those exchanges. It's just you have to subscribe to the queue if you want to receive the message, because it's a fan out type situation where it goes to one place, but there may be several subscribers to those messages, and they should all have their own queue. So in this case, I am going to send a message to user change, and I'm going to publish a message. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write anything. It doesn't matter what I write. In a real application, you're going to need to define your data and what you expect. But in this case, let's just say that we had something simple like we have the ID. And I'm sending over a whole JSON object. So I have the ID, and let's say the ID is whatever the ID happens to be, right? And actually, let's make it something more recognizable. So let's say 2334 9A, right? Whatever. That's not a true GUID, but we'll just say it's that. And then we'll say that what changes, let's say first name or something. First name and John. Whatever you send in the payload, however you run your messages, that's up to you. Okay, that's entirely up to you. I just want to show that I could send a message, and so this should be valid. Even if it's not valid, it'll still send it out, right? But because I'm not doing anything with it. But in the case if it was JSON you were expecting on the other end, then you should have valid JSON so that it'll understand it and be able to parse it out, right? So I'm just going to publish it, and now watch what happens in my watch what happens here and you probably won't be able to see it, but it's going to change. So I publish a message, and notice that it received the message ID. Okay, so let's get into how that happened. Okay, so you notice that I send the message, and I can send it again. I can send it more than once, right? I can publish the message, and it'll send it again. I could change this ID, whatever. Now, this would assume that there's a real publisher, something that's really happening, maybe on your user interface or on your database. Somebody's changing the names, and this other thing has to notify, or maybe like think of a bank account, for example, that a withdrawal took place in your bank account, and it publishes a message that, hey, this amount was withdrawn, and then the receiver, the processor, maybe there's a notifications processor that sends out a message that says, hey, let's send out a text message, and let's send out whatever notifications you have configured, and email that an account was that it was withdrawn, right? So that's that. Then of course that processor will have to handle how you what you do with that information. Right, but right now the only thing we're doing is receiving the message. So how did I do this? So let's start over. Let's start at the beginning. So one of the things that I did was that I took ChatGPT, and I had a conversation with ChatGPT, and I asked it to show me how to read a message from RabbitMQ and process it in a JavaScript handler. And I'm going to share all of this with you. And then it came back and said, here's how you do it, and here's how you connect to it, and all this information, right? And I said, okay. Then, so I went and created that, but then that wasn't sufficient. I wanted to make it generic, and I asked it a couple more questions because it seemed like it was polling, but it's really not. It's describing. So let's look at the code and see what it does there. So when you look at the processor engine here, the processor engine is a class. It has a queue of processor. I mean, not a queue, but a list or array of processors. It has a configuration, and we can add processors to it. That's part of its public interface. We have a private async method here that is used to bind, and I asked ChatGPT how to do the binding. Of course, in order to bind to a queue, you need to have the exchange name, and you can see it over here in the in the RabbitMQ that you have exchanges here, which I had created manually, and then the queues. But the queues get created dynamically. They get created by the program, and I can show you that because see this one, for example, this one that has no runner has those still there, those messages still there. So I can, for example, take this queue and delete it. Now be careful when you're working with RabbitMQ. I'll give you that warning. Don't delete your queues. If you want to purge the messages, but deleting the queue removes the queue out of your system. So you don't want to necessarily do that. So, but I'm going to do that in this case. I'm going to delete the queue, and I'm going to also delete that user change queue. Okay, and I'm going to just take it and delete it. In fact, I'm going to delete all the queues to show that the program will still create the queues. So now you're like wondering, okay, so I have no queues. So let's go back to this application. Let's shut it down. Let's run it again. And notice how it'll create the queues, and you'll see it create the queues. And notice over here, the queues weren't there a second ago, and now they're all back because the application actually creates the queues. And now I can start sending messages on the different queues. So I can send the queue on the no runner, which will give me an error, right? But if I send it on like the user change, and I just, very simply send user, and I don't want to get too involved with this, changed, whatever, right? Publish the message, and you notice it gets that user change message. So going back to what I did with ChatGPT, and I'm going to share the links and what I did in all the conversations and ChatGPT. That's one beautiful thing about it. It'll actually share the conversation of what I did. One of the first things that I had to do was I also had to ask it, well, how do I set up my RabbitMQ? Well, one of the first things you have to do is set up like in my case, I'm using Windows, so I had to set up the Docker desktop, right? So I already had that, and then all I had to do was perform some commands, and I'll show you in the README. I have those commands here. So when you see the code, so the first thing I did was Docker pull, and then a Rabbit management, and then the other thing I do is Docker run. And notice that I have to tell it that plugin for Rabbit management, because one of them is um, for the actual portal that you see that I'm showing you on the web page to run, and that's this port. So I had to map that port to it. But this port over here is the port that it uses for the application to talk to RabbitMQ, and then all you have to do is go to that page, and you'll be able to get in there. And so it's all you have to do to have RabbitMQ working. One of the other things that you may have to do is, when it prompts you, the firewall might prompt you to allow it to use use RabbitMQ for communication. You'll have to say yes. But anyway, that's all I really had to do, and those commands are easy enough. We could even run them again, just so you can see how they run. So let's take another tab, and let's just say that I run this Docker pool management, right? Which I already have it, so it's gonna not do it's probably not gonna take very long. So it pulls it. Okay. Image is up to date for Rabbit Management. It tells me that I already have it. Yours would look different if you didn't have the image. I don't want to delete it and get rid of it. But then all I have to do is say Docker run Rabbit Management. But now keep in mind that I already also have this container name. So I don't want to name it Q. I'm going to name it Q2. And I forget which side I have to tell it. I think I have to tell it that I want to map that to something like, let's say 73 and 73, because I don't have the same ports, right? So then I do that, and by doing that, it creates a new container, and let's see if it works that way. Oh, connectivity fail 1562. Okay, so maybe I got to do it the other way. So I make this 73. And I make this 72, and I make this 73, and I make this 72. So let's try it that way. Oh, now, well, see the problem that I'm running into it. I'm running into several problems because some things already exist, and then it's going to tell me that the port already exists. So now I got to increase this. Let's say that I go to 4 here and or here. And that's the problem with sometimes with Docker, that you can end up in a situation when you're playing around with it, that with a whole bunch of containers dangling and all this other stuff. So now you can see that I have RabbitMQ3. Now, if I wanted to go RabbitMQ3, so I could still go to the port, but I have to go to 74. So if I go to, for example, RabbitMQ, and I'll take this, which I really shouldn't have to copy it. I'm just going to go to that, and I'm going to go to 74. And you can see I just created that. And see, I'm there. But it's not going to have the queues because I'm not running on that port. Okay. My application is not running on that port. So here is a bare bones system. It doesn't have the exchanges that I have on the other one. It doesn't have the queues and everything. And one thing about it is that you may notice that certain of these have certain configurations. You'll have to get on Rabbit, learn more about Rabbit to see how those work. Because like this has all these different exchanges, and it has like a fan out, a headers. So I may not be telling you the correct things on that, and you'll have to dig more into that. Okay, that's just one word of caution. But anyway, that's what I did for creating the queue. Just follow these instructions, and you should have RabbitMQ. If you already have RabbitMQ, then you should just be able to talk to it. RabbitMQ by default runs on 5672 and 5672 for the console. This is just a way to say map it also so that I can see it on the machine, so that I can actually access it, and I'm not inside the actual container. It's just a way of mapping it to the outside, to the computer that I'm on, right? So once you do that, you have that. So I also asked it, okay, so let's see the processor engine. How does that work? Because one of the first things that I asked it was, how do I create a connection? You're gonna see here where it creates a connection, where now I loop through all the processors. Since I add the processors, it'll loop through them. Let's back up a little bit from that though, because if you look at the app.js, it's very simple. I just tell it, okay, here's my processor engine, bring in my processors. I have 4 of them, and then go ahead and instantiate the processor engine, configure it, tell it where the port. There may be other configuration in the real world environment, other things that you might need to have, and then just add every processor to it, and then run it, and then just run the engine. Now in the engine, when you run it, we establish a connection based on the configuration or the default, right? You could probably do this outside in the app instead of doing it here. That's probably where it should go as far as using the default connection. Then it loops to the processors, and it creates a channel, it binds it. We'll get into the binding in a second because that also was answered by ChatGPT. I asked ChatGPT, how do you bind it? And it just told me straight out, like, how do I bind it? Then, of course, we assert that the queue we assert the queue is valid, right? Durable. I'm not 100% on details what this actually means, to be honest with you. Because we do it again in the create bind queue. So create queue and bind. And so this just logs that waiting for messages. And then this thing here is where it subscribes to the event, right? So this is going to say, okay, channel consume, and I'm saying consume whatever queue name I tell it. What is the queue name? Well, the processor knows what queue name it belongs to. When the message comes down, if the message is not null, right, it'll go through the process and it takes the content, brings out the content out of the message to the string, and it calls the processors do work. That's why I say if you use this engine, you don't have to change its code. The only thing you have to change is your processors. And then, of course, we have a callback here. And let me share a little bit what's on the left side over here. So we acknowledge the message and we just tell the channel like we acknowledge it, and it removes the message from that queue. And of course, we have some try catches in case it doesn't. Just this fallback to inform uh, whatever. Of course, the configurer does take the configuration and assigns it. Now, the create view, queue and bind. Notice that I passed the channel and I send the processor down. Well, the processor has all the information as far as what exchange it belongs to, what its name is, what the routing key is, and then I just, like I said, I asked ChatGPT, how do I bind, and then I had to turn around and ask it, well, what if it already exists? I don't want to, force it to bind or anything, or create the queue if it already exists. So this thing does all that. It checks to see if the queue exists. If it doesn't, it checks it, right? So it says it creates the queue here. And I think I'm doing that. So if this is creating it, I'm doing it on the other one. So that probably needs to be fixed on the other method that we just came out of. And then here it just says, okay, let's bind it to the exchange. And that's all it does. And that's your engine right there. Now, what about the processors? Well, the processors are pretty empty, right? So right now we don't do anything with them other than log things. So when we have the user updated, all we do is log what came down. That's why you saw the messages there. But of course, here you would do some work. Maybe you take the information, and let's say that you had something like send a notification, or you update, or you sync data or something. Do some work, right? uh e.g. Sync um user information with other um other microservices. I'll just say other microservices, right? Or other domains, because they need to keep track of the changes, or maybe they send notifications. Whatever the case may be, the work will do it. Right now they're very bare. They don't have much, but of course you would just you would know what to do with the work that you have. Standard processor, I just created something else just to see that it was on different queue and whatever. But you notice one thing about all these, right? One thing about every processor, they have their own queue name, they have their exchange name, and they have the routing key, and of course the do work method, because the processor engine expects all these things to be there: the queue name, the exchange name, the routing key, and the do work method. Now, if we were using something like TypeScript, which would probably be a better option, then we would be able to bind that and provide interfaces to make sure that we're following the rules. Because right now, of course, it's just a class. It doesn't have to implement anything, not by contract, but however, it's an implicit contract where it will, it will error out if you don't have this. Like, for example, in the case where we have run here. Anyway, I think this already went on a little bit longer than I would have liked to, But I'll have all the links below. And guys, if you like this video, please like it. If you do, please subscribe to it so that way it'll help me be able to create more content for you and all these different things. Also, I will leave a link that if, you can buy me a coffee, and that of course helps fund the endeavors of creating this. It does take a little bit of my time and everything, and so, but hopefully it's helping you and hopefully help me grow the channel. And but hit those links down in the description. And yeah, if you have questions, please leave them in the comments. Even if it's just a comment that you enjoy the video, let me know. If you didn't like it, also let me know. Let me know the comments. I enjoy reading every comment. More comments uh, means that I can tell people are actually watching. And I know sometimes people disagree because maybe they go on too long, or maybe I explain things that they're not interested in. Hey, that's just what it is. So you can always forward to the pieces that you want or get the pieces you want. But like I said, I'll post the link to the code, and I'll post the link to the conversation that I had with ChatGPT. And hopefully you can get it up and running, and hopefully you can use that for your own project. This is something that you can run in Node, and there's additional things that you have to do if you want it to run automatically and start, and even put this in a container. Maybe I'll do some videos on that. I'm publishing the message and put it in a container, so that way you can see how it can be resilient and restart when it crashes or different things like that. Okay, but like I said, subscribe. Feel free to buy me as many copies as you like. If you found this video helpful, please leave it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.